He'll come back for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India home. Lords goes wild.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is Siddhartha Vaidyanathan at Sidvi on Twitter. And I'm joined today by two regulars on the pod. We have my co-host, my usual co-host, Mahesh. Hi, Mahesh. Nice to have you here. Hey, and we also have Kartikeya at Cricketing View on Twitter, who is a blogger, tweeter, writer, apparently a very strident voice on cricket. Kartikeya. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. So, and Mahesh is at Cornered on Twitter. I'll link their Twitter handles. I'll link Kartikeya's Substack. I'll link some articles that are relevant to this pod. Thanks for joining. Before I start, I just want to mention, I haven't been mentioning this in a while, but thank you to all our regular subscribers via Ko-fi. It is ko-fi.com. You've been, very generous, sending us regular monthly contributions and supporting the pod over a long time. And some of you have actually been going on for quite a while. So I thought I must thank you all. I mean, you can go to I will link the Ko-fi page with all your names on it. And I've thanked you individually there. So yeah, I must mention that I'm very appreciative. Anyway, so today on the podcast, I thought we'd talk about a topic that, keeps coming up regularly in cricketing discourse, but something that we don't seem to discuss in depth too often. This is the idea of greatness in cricket, and especially the idea of greatness across eras. And now in this social media age, you regularly have, some publication will post something saying this person is the greatest bowler of all time. And then there will be some 300 comments about why this is the most ridiculous post of all and all that. Basically, there's like a constant discussion around greatness around cricket. And then there's also this idea that comparing across eras in cricket is a foolhardy exercise, and that a Vivian Richards or a Vijay Hazare who played so many years ago there is no point in even comparing them with the modern players. There is also the idea that that every generation seems to have the idea that the generation that they saw growing up can never be surpassed. That is, of course, a nostalgia tinted view that often comes in, because when you're the impressionable stage of your lives, you believe that there can be nothing greater than this. And there is also the third sort of view of recency bias, where people believe that whatever they're seeing in the last 5-6 years is that nothing can surpass it, that nothing has surpassed it. And so people who perhaps haven't read much or are not in the know of all that has happened in cricket are likely to think that, Virat Kohli is the greatest one-day player, at least, of all time, and one of the greatest test players of all time. And, to be fair to them, they will point to all these records that he has amassed and the conditions he has played in and the teams he has played against and all that. So, yeah, I just thought of exploring all this. There's also this whole much more fundamental concept of greatness itself, how one defines it, what are the parameters taken. Now, these days, we have a lot of stats and data to actually, go with, rather than earlier when it was pretty much like, your average, or you had to filter it down to which country you scored in second innings, who is the greatest second innings player of all time, who's the greatest. I mean, recently Gideon Hay wrote an article where he said Pat Cummins is the greatest first change bowler of all time, which I found very interesting. He didn't say he's one of the greatest bowlers of all time. He said he's the greatest first change bowler of all time. So, yeah, you thought I'll bring you guys in. Early thoughts. What do you think of all this? Is it even worth it? Is it why is this so contentious? And what are your general thoughts on greatness and greatness across eras? Mahesh?
Yeah, I think cricket has been quite fortunate that we have reasonably standard benchmarks to compare over time. I mean, this whole notion of bowling average in the 20s and batting average closer to 50 or above 50 has served as a great benchmark, when so much has changed, like then I was just checking, like when Bradman was playing, he played like 41% of the matches, played around the world, right? So, and just like a few handful of teams played, and they used to go by ship, and, so many sort of things could change. And we still hail those two benchmarks as some sort of sacred this thing, which is fantastic to start with, right? Like, I mean, as a tennis fan, it's like when you look at Grand Slams in the 20s, I don't know how to make sense of it, because when Sampras did 14, that became a big thing. But even in cricket, for instance, of course, the 500 and 600 clubs have been breached more easily recently with the next generation and so on. But we still don't look at the absolute numbers. We still look at the average and the strike rate and the effectiveness and the spread across different conditions and so on. I enjoyed so long as it's done with a spirit which is sort of for fun. The moment it gets into like very serious territory of X is great and Y is nothing, and flat track bully and stuff like that, and it always involves some level of contempt for either the current generation or the previous generation, and both are ridiculous, right? I mean, like for instance, one of KD's pet peeves is to kind of point out the fact that there's this too much nostalgia in cricket analysis, right? You always think of the past with sort of rose-tinted eyes, glasses, and so on. But the point is, I mean, these guys are extremely rich. They operate at a time when playing cricket is so lucrative. They can just forget about the rest of the issues and focus exclusively on cricket, which was not the case. I mean, even in the post Bradman, even till Chappell, or probably even till Border era, the money was not great, right? I mean, they used to manage so many other things. And if all they get is like a little bit of nostalgia and a little bit of praise and sort of celebrating them as superior, it's okay. I mean, that's the least that they deserve from us. So,
yeah, I think KD's theory is fundamentally that it is likely that every generation will only get better than the previous, given the advances in science and know-how and things, right? I mean, KD, I mean, you've said that the average bowler of today is likely much better than the average bowler in the 80s. Is that something that am I interpreting it correctly?
That's not unreasonable. No, I mean that they have better facilities, better equipment, better support, better everything. So they are better, but that doesn't really matter, right? I mean, they're not playing against the players in the 80s, right? So whether you're great or not is a measure of how you did against the players you played against. No, I mean, so and in any era, you can say how far apart from the norm for that era the player was, and that's what decides greatness. No, I mean, fine, you have a very, very batting friendly era in the 2000s, the first decade of the 2000s, especially like from say 2002 to 2013. Even in that era, if you have a player who's averaging 70, that's still like one order of magnitude better than the players who average like 50, 55 in that era, right? So that player is still doing something which his peers are not able to match. That greatness is sort of being exceptional among your peers. That for a sustained period of time. I mean, you do it for 10 matches and that's one thing. You do it for 80 matches, that's another thing. No? I mean, for one thing, over 80 matches, the range of conditions you will encounter is very much likely to be wider and more challenging than what you would encounter over 10 matches. It's possible that Pat Cummins is a better bowler than Dennis Lillee. Also because, Pat Cummins is a record in which, he's played more widely across the world. He's played in Asia, he's played in England, he's played in Australia, he's played in South Africa, and he's done well everywhere. Whereas Dennis Lillee hardly played in Asia at all. And he played in West Indies. At West Indies was awesome. And his record was decidedly worse than it was still. So for all those reasons, you sort of conclude that Pat Cummins is a better bowler than Dennis Lillee. But that still doesn't mean that Dennis Lillee wasn't a great bowler, right? I mean, in his era, Dennis Lillee was still doing something which, they can't think of 2 or 3 more bowlers in that era who did that.
Yeah. Okay. So the good that you brought up Cummins, which you invariably do, obviously. But one of the things here is that one of the challenges of
What do
looking at
you mean? What do you mean? I invariably do. It is true. He is a better bowler. He is one of the greatest bowlers of all time.
yeah,
No, but
I
you
never
don't have to. Like, for instance, it was a generic question, right? You could have picked two batsmen. We could have picked two other bowlers. It didn't have to be like, when there are 100 bowlers to pick from to compare, right? You could have compared Dennis Lillee to, let's say, Lendwall or whatever, right? You could have had all kinds of comparison. You could have compared Bumrah to Kapil Dev.
Yeah,
You could have compared Rabada to Donald.
Yeah, but you're just, at least I'm not comparing some parochial Rohit Sharma, man. Then you're genuine all-time great.
Okay. No, that's what the issue of Cummins or a player who is currently active is that, I mean, for all practical purposes, for all that Cummins has done, he has still taken 200 wickets. Okay, fine. 200 wickets is a great achievement. That's understandable. But do you have, there is a sort of a strain of thought that says that one needs to wait before one can even talk in the terms of greatness in the all-time scale, before, until they are done. Because what if, say, 1 year later, God forbid, Cummins gets a injury and his career is just cut short? Then in the sort of the historical perspective, he may not be considered one of the greatest of all time, right? Because of the lack of volume or lack of quantity, or, even though he has a phenomenal average, we all know that we all have seen what he has done. And obviously people who watched him will know his greatness, but I'm just talking about the much more wider perspective.
Yeah, perhaps, I mean, if Cummins' career ends at, like, say, 50 tests, then he'll be judged like as a player who played 50 tests. He won't be judged as a player who played 120 tests and took 500 wickets, which he's probably not going to take anyway. Because, I mean, is he going to play 75 more tests, do you think? I doubt it.
I mean, he's played 44 tests in 11 years, or around 11 years. So,
but the 11 years is an exaggeration, right? In his case, essentially, there was one test in 11, and like the rest of his test career started in 2017.
Yeah, okay, yeah. He had this long stretch where he didn't play and all that. Yeah.
No, sorry. I had to weigh in here. See, you could have taken any bowler and argued that, like, a current bowler has a lot of significant advantages and therefore he ought to be better, right? That the next generation sports people or athletes have to be better than the previous generation, or at least a couple of generations back. And that's a fair point. But Dennis Lillee is particularly tricky because, one, this whole argument that he didn't play in Asia is fine, but you can't hold it against him. It's not like he played in Asia and had a bad record. I mean, he did have a bad record in Pakistan, but the sample size is so small. And the other thing about Dennis Lillee is that, one, his duration of playing was like 14 years, and he played immense amount of cricket, which was not just Test cricket, right? They didn't have the advantage of just playing prime Test cricket and prime international cricket and nothing else. So they played a lot of first-class cricket and a lot of even like league cricket and so on. And that too, admittedly, with sort of less fitness knowledge and less fitness support and so on, right? And so you're like talking about playing 70 matches over 14 years, and Pat Cummins has played 44 in essentially 5 years, right? So there's that. The duration matters. I mean, some people have played 20 years and played hardly 100 tests, right? The duration matters. The other thing is that with the most important difference between Lee and Cummins is that Cummins bowls with a more potent sort of bowling attack. Whereas Lillee did not have the privilege of doing that all the time. Of course, the legend has it that Lillee and Thompson bowled a lot together, but they didn't bowl as much. And he bowled a lot with pretty much a thin bowling attack around him. And more, if you look at the number of overs that he's bowled like 18,000 some balls as per Cricinfo. That's what 3,000 overs, right? 3,080 overs. Cummins has the luxury of bowling much lesser. Even if you adjust for pro rata of 44 tests, he's bowled 1,588 overs. About half of it when he's played much more than half of his test matches and so on. Even there, I think there has to be some contextualizing for the fact that there were other factors to consider, right? And like one of the classic things said about Bradman is he played just like, in two conditions and three countries and so on. But the point is he was so far ahead of the rest. And that's where you got to compare how Cummins, the point that KD made earlier is that how far ahead is Cummins compared to the current pack and how far ahead Dennis Lillee was compared to the contemporary bowlers of his time. And that's really so when you're comparing across eras, that's what you're comparing. Like, in their era, how dominant were they? And is that comparable?
Yeah, and also that Bradman conditions point, it's like we are looking at it from the modern lens, and where everything is, we think is standardized and all. First of all, it's not even standardized now. In all the grounds in England, it's not like you have identical conditions. All the grounds in Australia, it's not that way. But then there was also this whole concept of uncovered pitches, and you had, when it rained, the pitches would drastically alter and all. So Bradman did have multiple conditions. In fact, one of the criticisms of Bradman was that he was bad in uncovered pitches compared to, say, other players of that time, the sticky dogs, as they call them. So there was a lot of conditions were different. Perhaps, yeah. He didn't have to travel. He didn't have as much jet lag. He had no jet lag because he probably
but he had to travel more even for one series in England than most people do now, right?
But he went, that journey itself was like, so many days when they went by ship and all. So it's not like it's not the rapidity of travel.
Yeah, but he didn't have to travel more. England and Australia are just equally far apart even then.
Yeah, but
but the amount of time you spend. Right?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like you live in a hotel for like 6 weeks or whatever it is it takes for the crossing. No?
Come on, you can fall sick. You can you don't get the food. Now they bring their chef and all that, right?
England felt sick this week.
I know, despite all the privileges. That's my point, right? The other point about this is that, okay, one, you're looking at whatever, right? 10 teams versus 2 or whatever is, if you look at whole international cricket, a lot more teams and so on. But what makes you believe that this is like anywhere closer to the peak? What if 150 years down the line, there are like 45, 50 teams playing test cricket? Then somebody is going to look back at Sachin and say, oh, he just played against 9 countries. Come on. This whole long-termism is very problematic.
No, even now, people do mention, right? Like when Sachin played, how weak this team was, how weak that team was, and how, like, for instance, when he played against, there was some stat about recently. Anyway, there is even a qualification for Sachin even now, like, even though it's just been like 10 years since he finished, there's still like there are still qualifications for his career. Yeah. KD, anything to respond to that Lillee point about the intangibles, a term that gets under?
No, okay. Let me clarify. Mine was not intangible; they were tangibles. I hate the intangibles as much as KD does, but mine was not intangible.
Intangibles don't exist, man.
Okay, I was just saying that to troll you, but yeah, continue.
No, but the weak teams point is a good one because. Interestingly enough, I think great batsmen appear more commonly in weak teams than in strong teams. Lara, Tendulkar, at their peak, they played
Headley.
Martin
George
Crowe,
Headley.
Yeah, Martin Crowe, George Headley, etc., etc. At their peak, they played in pretty average teams. But there's a corollary to that. The one of the most nonsensical parameters, if you will, let's be generous and call it a parameter of greatness, is how many match-winning contributions a player makes. Was he a match winner? What does that really mean? It has in one sense, it does mean something really interesting and clever. In that, it's that the player is so much better than the peers that the player is going to be able to score runs or take wickets in conditions where other players are not going to be able to do it. And he's going to be able to do it in a wider range of conditions compared to his peers. And so therefore, the player appears as a match winner because the player is more consistent. So, but then there's the whole match winner thing where that on that particular day, on the 4th day, on the afternoon, when the sun was low in the western sky and, the shadow of such and such ground was falling across the pitch, And
you don't have to say such and such a ground. You can just say Chepauk. That's fine. You can. I know you want to say it.
Yeah, and when that time he skied one, and like Wasim Akram took a pressure catch, and etc. etc. So not a match winner. There's no such thing as a match winner. No, I mean, everyone does their thing, and the match result is a cumulative, conclusion based on the contributions of 22 guys. So, but this match winner thing is a peculiar thing in greatness. When you must play when it matters. I know you love that phrase.
No, and it keeps coming up in other sports also. Now the football World Cup is happening. And then, this Messi, people are like, Messi has never won a World Cup because, he's not a World Cup winner. He doesn't have World Cup winning ability. I'm like, what is this World Cup winning ability, man? You need like you need like a whole team to win a World Cup. And people have this sort of a random thought that Diego Maradona won the World Cup by himself, that nobody else was needed around him. He just by himself, he won the World Cup. I'm like, you guys are like, what are you talking?
Okay, let's not go down to the clutch and the big moments again.
Yeah, I mean, but the point is that this comes up in multiple occasions, of course, and it's transcended.
I know, it's like a Frankenstein monster, man. It's a horrible thing.
No, so by that logic, Curtly Ambrose is a lesser match winner than Damien Fleming, right? Like, because he won more matches, simply speaking. He was part of more match winning teams.
No World Cup also for Curtly Ambrose.
Yeah, no World Cup winning ability. Yeah. Curtly Ambrose, Courtney Walsh, so many people. No, but it's like, ultimately it's what? It's that moment of, what do you call it? Transcendence, right? Like Shane Warne, for instance. Shane Warne in the 99 World Cup, or Steve Waugh, 99. It's almost like you have to find that moment to assign to that certain player, which then gives them that greatness attribute. It's not necessarily what happened throughout their career, but it is what happened on one particular day in one particular time. And so, yeah, KD, you're right. If that match, if India had won that match in Chennai that you mentioned in 99, by scoring 17 runs that were needed after Tendulkar got out, then that innings would be viewed vastly differently than it is now. I mean, then Tendulkar would be the match winner, even though he perhaps was even that day. It was the others who were not able to complete the job.
True. But, there's also the whole thing about if you have Tendulkar doing very well and being doing very well as a rule, which he did, because he's a terrific player, great ability, more ability than most of his peers. Then the thing is that people seem to notice that the one period when he doesn't score. Therefore there was a time in around the 2003 World Cup, especially after that, the final where I think McGrath got him out, or somebody got him out. Very
McGrath.
In the second over or something. There was the whole thing about, final mein usko jamta nahi. Final is not his thing. It's like, it wasn't true even then. I mean, he had a pretty good record in finals and stuff. I mean, actually, the thing is...
Yeah, but the big match. Finals, Coca-Cola Cup is not finals, it was World Cup final.
That is true. Even if the World Cup final is played on a road, in what was it? Cape Town, no? No.
Johannesburg. And even though the sample size for his World Cup finals are 2.
Yes.
And one of them chasing 350 or something, right?
Yeah. And that too, chasing 350 in 2003, not in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, 350 in 2003 is basically 550 or something today. So,
in a World Cup final, that means it's 750.
Yeah, World Cup final, it's even more. You have to give an exponent to it. But it becomes like there's a great story I remember from the 90s. I don't remember the Australian commentator was involved. He was commentating with Gavaskar, and it's probably good that I don't remember. But they were talking about Indian batsmen who were struggling in Australia. I think it was 99. And this guy, he says, your players, to prove that you're great, you have to play well in these conditions in England and Australia. And he was going on, and Gavaskar got a little bit cheesed off and said, so you mean Dennis is not a great bowler? Because you know how Gavaskar is. Gavaskar gets pissed off when people say bad things about India, and so he he has to plant the flag. So he did. And so the guy, without missing a beat, the Australian commentator says, no, Dennis is different. Dennis was a great bowler. So it's like, there isn't like greatness is a device often, and so I'm not particularly interested in greatness in that sense. And the greatness as a device keeps appearing in these conversations. It's like, I always think that, I used to have this one uncle, sadly he's passed now. But, when India won, he used to say, let's means, our guys, they played really well today. Huh? And then when India used to lose, and this is when I was in school, he used to say, Kai tuza India, which means, what your India, look what they did. So when they lost, it was my India. And then when they won, it was his India. There's like, this is just a device. So, the point being made is something completely not related to sport. That's not really interesting. So I think we should leave aside that aspect of greatness entirely in this conversation. But except to point out that aspect of greatness and that sort of role of greatness as a rhetorical device exists. But on the other hand, greatness per se is an interesting topic of conversation. And I still think that contemporary players are better than their predecessors. For obvious reasons, they have better opportunities, better facilities, more money, etc. But which is to say that if Bradman played in 2022, he would probably really be, still average 90, I think. Because he would also have today's facilities and today's equipment and today's opportunities, and today's financial security and all that. So I think that's also, the converse is also true. Like if Dennis Lillee bowled today, he would probably be, as good as, the greatest bowlers of the day. I don't think he would be like an average bowler today. I don't think it works like that. But I just think that for what they did in their era and what these guys are doing in this era, if you compare those two things, then what they're doing today is probably better.
Yeah, and also, you've 2 points here. One is that, if just the Gavaskar point is slightly important because, like, if just hypothetically imagine if Akshar Patel were to play like 80% of his tests in India, he plays like 30, 40 tests. He averages like some ridiculous sub 20 number. He runs through teams. He doesn't play in England. He plays 3 tests in Australia.
You mean if he was Ravindra Jadeja?
If he were Ravindra Jadeja, who doesn't play in England and plays like very little in Australia and gets hammered, basically, it is unlikely that, forget English and Australian commentariat, it is unlikely that even the Indian commentariat will consider him great. Because there seems to be that benchmark from the Indian eyes or the subcontinental eyes that requires that, that performance in a certain condition to be anointed great. But I don't think David Warner, for all practical purposes, I think is considered, will go down as, one of the, at least from the modern context, he'll go down as a great batsman. Of course, he won't be comparable to a Greg Chappell or a Neil Harvey, not that scale of greatness. But I don't think Australians or English people look at that, these conditions as closely as subcontinental folk do.
You know what? I quite like it. That's the way it should be. If Anderson took whatever, he's got as many wickets as Kapil Dev's test tally just in England, which is a good thing. Even if Ashwin has as many wickets in India, we should celebrate it. The problem is we do the opposite. We have this habit of rating anything overseas as superior, anything outside of the subcontinent is superior. And see, at the end of the day, people in England and Australia don't take cricket as seriously as we do. Even their hardcore cricket fans do not think about cricket beyond the cricket season. The people who watch it throughout the calendar year are a handful of people, right? And like for instance, if you ask any serious cricket fan in India about the home away record skew of Cheteshwar Pujara, for instance, everybody has an opinion on that. Like the amount of ridicule that someone like Mahela gets on the subcontinental social media is a joke. Like a player like Mahela in England would be celebrated as a god, right? And that's the right thing, to be honest, because I mean, playing even at home where you average 50 is a phenomenal thing. And it's not like Mahela was playing on flat tracks. He was playing on fucking square turners where nobody else crossed 20 and he used to score 100. Like that's like Victor Trumper level of skill, man. Why would
don't say nobody else when you had Thilan in that team? Don't say nobody else, huh?
No, but there are instances where nobody else did, by the way. So
yeah. Mahela's like perhaps I won't even say like subcontinental wise. I don't even know why I'm saying that, but I'm saying that just to make this point of what people will say is that I don't think there's been a greater player that I've watched in these sort of conditions than Mahela.
Yeah, so that's the right thing to do, to be honest. Like, instead of actually attacking, let's say, the English and the Aussies saying, oh, why are you not looking at Warner's away record? Why are you celebrating Michael Clarke when he's mediocre outside? We should probably do the opposite and celebrate people like that we have here. Rather than putting them down. I think we have got this massive complex of doing well. What is that? The Sena filter is a classic example, right? I mean, Sena is a joke because South Africa did not exist as a test playing country for the longest time, right? Like somebody gave a Sena record of Gavaskar. That makes no sense, But that is essentially what? That is our complex, right? Nothing else. I think I'm absolutely okay with it. Sorry, just to go back on the match winning part and these big moments part that KD mentioned. I don't want to harp too much on it, but there was one particular incident that came to mind. When Ben Stokes played that epic Ashes fourth innings chase 100 against Australia, Ashes, of course, Australia, Bob Willis was asked this question, is it better than Botham's Headingley innings? And there was a headline which says, Bob Willis thinks Stokes' innings is better than Botham's, right? I was like, wow, what a headline. And then you go into the video and you see it. Yeah, it's not even a question. I have said that Botham's Manchester 100 in the same series was better than his Headingley 100 because Headingley 100 was a fluke. So that's
which is a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, which is what it is. I mean, sometimes cricketers talk like that and some other cricketers say, oh, great moment, big moment, the great player flourish. But these great moments are hazy, man. Like some work. A great player on an average will boss some sort of these what are called clutch moments, and sometimes they don't. And it depends, right? Like it is like Inzamam ul Haq winning against Bangladesh with the last wicket in hand. People wouldn't remember. But if you do the same thing against Australia, people will remember. Now both are like clutch moments, right? But what sticks in memory, like the Coca-Cola Cup versus the World Cup, is essentially the problem of your memory. It's got nothing to do with the difference in situation.
I mean, Inzamam ul Haq, first of all, he did it twice. Once against Bangladesh also he did it.
That's what I'm saying. That wouldn't be remembered,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but you're saying the Australia one would be remembered.
Yeah, but both are like, if you talk, okay, let me put it this way, right? If you're talking about clutch, I would like to believe that if you're 1 wicket away from losing to Bangladesh, is a greater pressure. You don't want to. Like people will be a lot more tolerant of you losing to Australia than you losing to Bangladesh. So purely from like objective definition of pressure, this should be more pressure. Like you don't want to be losing to Bangladesh. Right?
No, don't go into objective definition of pressure and all. Okay, that's just like you will be chasing your tail for the rest of the East. Honestly,
no. I mean, when I say objective, I'm saying sarcastically. I don't mean it.
Yeah, I mean,
no, but yeah.
Go ahead.
No. I'm saying, okay. One of the things that you had mentioned, I think maybe last year or something, when India toured South Africa, was interesting that you said that this South African team is perhaps better than many of the teams that have gone before. And initially I found that to be a an absurd comment because, I said, how can this team be better than the team from, the team from the 2000s, team from the 90s? But then when you made the point about the fact that when we are looking like when my generation is looking back at South Africa, we are looking at a South African team that was like that hammered India, especially when India traveled to South Africa, right? But this South African team beat India they beat India 2-1 in a very, very close series. So then what happens is that from my eyes, this team will never be as good as the previous team. But that is also because from my eyes, I watched a middling Indian team get hammered by them. So there is that bit that people don't take into account as well, right?
Yeah, but this is the whole premise point of comparing how teams are doing among their peers, and how players are doing among their peers. I mean, look, in the 90s, India were a mid-table side, and South Africa were, at least in South Africa, that meant that India were never going to be competitive. So for South Africa, beating India in South Africa was fairly straightforward. There was not much. I mean, there was only Kumble who was really a threat, a wicket-taking threat, and that's saying a lot. But in 2022, this was a serious Indian attack. I mean, and it took a lot of good fortune in a low-scoring series for South Africa to win. So you have to. I mean, you can always tell where a team is in its era, right? So, for instance, in every era, there will always be a top-table side or top-table sides, and there will always be mid-table sides, and there will always be bottom-table sides. So that's common to all eras, right? So you can compare eras that way. You can say that, okay, yeah, in the 90s, India were ranked 5 or 6 in the world as a rule. And in 2020s, India ranked 1 or 2 in the world as a rule. And that means that playing against India in 2022 is a different proposition to what it was in the mid-90s. So then you can start saying something about, well, okay, so making runs against India in 2022 is harder than it was in 1996, 97, or 92, 93, or whatever, 2000, or whenever you want to, 2001, 2002, for instance. I don't think this current Indian side would lose a test match to an attack led by Nanti Hayward and Makaya and Tini. They just wouldn't. I don't think. I mean that. But they are. But playing against an attack led by Kagiso Rabada is a whole different ball game. That's like facing Prime Donald, who didn't have his greatest years taken away by apartheid.
Yeah, there are 2 points to that, right? One is this Indian fans' perception of this South African team not being anywhere close to the earlier one because India were a mid-table team then. But even if you take India out of the equation, it is fair to argue that the general perception is that, right? They would, like, if you go tell an English or an Aussie fan, they would have a similar reaction as well. Not so much. Actually, Karthikey's point is very valid here. When you bring in Ntini and Hayward, that sort of bowling attack, I guess then people will concede that this bowling attack is better. But if you talk about Donald and Pollock and that kind of bowling attack, one, the Donald and Pollock that you're evaluating of the late 90s is not the bowlers of the late 90s. You're evaluating them after their career has ended. And retrospectively, you going back and thinking of them as legends. I mean, they were in the process of being legends when they were playing, right? That's one thing. So it's entirely possible that this batch of bowlers will go on to acquire a similar status 15 years down the line, right? That's one part. But even with Donald and Pollock, the depth that Keddy argues about is extremely valid because the third and the fourth bowlers were not as good at any time in their history.
Brian McMillan and who else? Brett Schultz for a brief period, but he played very little.
In fact, Brett Schultz, when he played, was the first bowler, not even the fourth bowler.
Oh, yeah. Simcox, no?
No, I'm saying the fourth, the seamer. I'm trying to compare it to the current attack. I forgot who it might have been. Anyway, yeah. But you're right.
Why that? I mean, compare the 2010 South African attack to the 2022 South African attack. I mean, what's his name? So Tsobe and who was the fourth bowler? Harris were the behind Morkel and Steyn in that series. And you can see it in the figures, no? I mean, the Morkel and you can see it especially in the figures of that era when South Africa are playing Australia. That their figures against Steyn and the Australian batsmen's figures against Steyn and Morkel are decidedly average, but their figures against the change bowling are, gargantuan, and they're just hammering the change bowling, and they're not going to be able to do that now, no, in 2022, because the change bowling is better. I mean, Nortje is a serious bowler, and I mean that he's. I mean, he must be one of the quickest South African bowlers in the last 30 years. Yeah.
And Maharaj is a serious spinner. I mean, he's perhaps, I don't know, he's perhaps the best spinner in South African cricket, right? I mean, Hugh Tayfield maybe, but I'm saying recently.
I mean, post-apartheid, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and I mean, Maharaj also has the benefit of not being an off spinner, no? So, I mean, he's effective against right-handers who still make up the majority of lineups he faces.
Yeah, I mean, when you brought up Nithini and Hayward, Nanti Hayward and Nithini, I thought of that lovely little nugget that Firdaus Munda mentioned when she came on the podcast here about how they were perhaps the only set of opening bowlers who could not understand each other. Hayward spoke only Afrikaans. Nithini spoke only his language, I think it was Hosa, and they could not communicate with each other. And she's like, I don't think there would be any other set of opening bowl or any other bowling partners who would not have understood each other. So, yeah, that was interesting. Mid-table point is, I think the other thing that you brought up is also like, for me, I mean, it's the reverse. Like for me, the South Africa, just as much as the South African team of the 90s and 2000s were like giants because they were tulping India, like we were getting 66 all out and 100 all out in Durban and all. The other is also true, like Nasser Hussain, Graham Thorpe, Michael Atherton. I mean, that England team of the 90s and 2000s is, in my head is always like, they got hammered against Australia all the time, but they were getting hammered against a team that was the greatest of all, like perhaps the greatest of all time. So whether to judge them on that yardstick or to judge them on the fact that they were actually good players. I mean, I would never consider Nasser Hussain like I would have thought, oh, Nasser Hussain, pretty average player, but I think Nasser Hussain was a much better player than average.
And they also played in a harder era to score runs, right? I mean, okay, that era of English batting is a good comparison to the current era. My argument is that there's not much difference. One of the most popular sort of arguments against the current teams in general, and particularly current English and West Indies teams, is the fact that nobody averages 40, right? Even averaging 40 is so difficult. But that's because of the fact that, they tend to play against better teams more often than before. So there is no...
That's because of the fact there are no Rawalpindi-type pitches all over the world.
Yeah, that's one thing. Also teams, right? The kind of teams that you played against. Now, if the bowling attack across the world has got more depth, which means it's harder to score runs. Where it gets peculiar is the in-between these two generations, where the pitches are flatter, right? And therefore, it was easier for Kevin Pietersen to average as much as he did, Jonathan Trott to average as much as he did, Trescothick to average as much as he did. So, and the 2005 Ashes gang enjoys this reputation of being this great English team, primarily riding on the 2005 high, and also the fact that it was just a flatter era, so it's easier to, make a case when a majority of batsmen are averaging in the mid-40s that it was a greater batting unit, but objectively speaking, I'm not sure.
Yeah, but that doesn't really... I mean, look, I tend to think that the Indian lineup in any era is as good as the Indian lineup in any other era in modern times. Like, once you say that, the game has become professional and et cetera, and, the facilities are pretty much at the same level and the pitches are pretty much at the same level. Okay, sometimes they may be more bowler friendly, sometimes they may be flat. Fine. But assuming that, there's variation in all eras. Then I think the batting lineups are basically equal. I mean, I think that's also true about England, and it's also true about Australia, and also true about West Indies, etc. Now, yeah, there are one or two really exceptional players who come up from time to time. Steve Smith or Tendulkar or, okay, fine, let's say Peterson, etc., etc. But, their effect is not as much as people think. It still doesn't change in a test match whether or not a team is going to win or not. That's decided by the bowling. And the bowling depth is one thing, but the pitches they get to bowl on is also another thing. No? I mean, if for instance, you have the current Indian bowling lineup and they're playing in an era where, on average, the pitch is more likely to be like Rawalpindi than it is likely to be like, I don't know, whatever, Cape Town this year when India played, or some pitch like that, right? Then the bowlers are going to get worn down over a period of time. They won't stay fit for as long, and their figures won't match up. And, then the consequences of them having skin in the game will catch up with them. Some of them will get dropped because they have a couple of bad test matches. Some of them, like, it happened to Harbhajan Singh in 2006 in Pakistan. They played on two absolute roads. I mean, India, like, in one of those roads, Pakistan made, I think, 680 and conceded a first innings lead to India. And in the second test, in the second test, they again made like more than 650 or something. And India responded with 400 for one or something like that. This is just like...
No, it was the reverse. The first test was that 400 for one when Sehwag scored 254. And the second test was what you said. That was Dhoni's thing. Yeah. So,
right, you're right. So, what? Yeah, I mean, a bowler gets murdered for that. No, I mean, Harbhajan Singh didn't take a single wicket in those two test matches. And he conceded like 700 runs or something like that. It's completely insane. And that sort of thing can destroy a bowler, no? And that sort of thing can hurt a bowler for the next few test matches. So, yeah, those sorts of things happen, and those sorts of things, affect outcomes to some extent. But basically, I think that eras are self-contained, and they are, because that's all that's there, I mean, it's not like these players are, complaining that, oh, I did not get to play against that player or that player. You just play against whoever you have, And what else are you going to do? So, I think the whole, comparing across eras is not as hard as people say.
It is true that most cricketers don't say that I wish I had played against this team and in this era and so on. But your particular case of Harbhajan Singh example is curious because every time Ashwin takes a fifer, he always says that I wish I had played in this on these wickets so that I would have taken as many fifers, right? So,
but why him? All finger spinners generally say, I wish I had played in the era of DRS because I would have got so many wickets.
Yeah, but not every time. Not every time there's a DRS dismissal, they come out and say it. Harbhajan just says it every time Ashwin gets wickets.
Dude, he has a Twitter account. What are you going to do?
No, but also isn't KD saying it's a fair comment to make given the era he played in?
No, it's a fair comment. Cricketers should be making it, but he was saying most cricketers don't say it. I'm saying no, Harbhajan always says it.
But it's not a question of whether it's fair or not. It's a lament. I mean, fine. I have a lot of time and I think we should all have a lot of time for, things which players get off their chest.
Yeah, that's true. It is true that most cricketers would have those feelings, right? And there are many different aspects to that. I mean, some people like the fact, someone who's probably a very ordinary test cricketer who could have been an explosive T20 cricketer would be wishing that he had played in this era and so on, right? And there are many sort of wishful thinking and regrets and so on. And it's entirely fair that they voice it out.
No, I mean, I want to go back to one point that KD made initially about how, a batsman who plays in a weak team often seems to, have that chance to be elevated. Tendulkar in the 90s, Lara towards the
Andy Flower
stage, Andy Flower, George Headley, etc. But if you look at the bowlers, it seems to be the reverse. Like a bowler who plays in a weak team almost has no chance in this whole conversation compared to a bowler who plays in a strong team. Like, for instance, one thing that recently came up was the Kemar Roach, right? Like, how good a bowler is Kemar Roach? And there were people who were, they're suggesting that, comparing Kemar Roach with the other great West Indian bowlers and all. But in the moment you mention like a Roberts or any of those bowlers, that's it. It's like there is that's the end of the conversation. It's like you're being like a dimwit by even comparing Kemar Roach to a player who as great as one of those West Indian quartet. But I mean, you look at the record, Kemar Roach has been a phenomenal bowler in the last whatever years, right? And he's played in a weak team. So shouldn't you be giving him more credit for playing in comparatively such a weak West Indian team and doing so well?
Yeah, but that's because the question of all greatness is not about how good a bowler he was. No, it is about how much glory he enjoyed. Because great batsmen, they get to play lone hands, and even if like they're batting with the tail and the opposition not trying to get them out, and they get from like a 30 and 80 balls to 85 not out in a 220 all out innings, and this helps the average. In the public memory, they remain as the one guy who resisted against the opposition and so on and so forth. So that's the story which gets told of a batsman who basically plays a hopeless innings and just happens to remain not out from a competitive standpoint, right? But for a bowler, a bad innings is like bowling and going for like 600 for 4, like what happened with Roach at first, And I mean, there's no glory in that. I mean, Anil Kumble, his one of his most extraordinary test match performances came in your favorite test match, 952 for 6, where he bowled, I think, like 80 overs or something like that in that inning.
Favorite test match. Yeah.
It's really hard to do. It's really, really hard to do. It's an extraordinary thing to keep bowling. Shane Warne, I think one of Shane Warne's greatest, most extraordinary performances was in India in 1998. At that time he had basically been, and I wrote about this, I think, when he died sadly, that he had been like this extraordinary bowler, who he was a leg spinner, which in the mid 1990s was like he was being a unicorn. Secondly, he was a leg spinner who bowled most of his time in Australia, which is even harder because there aren't that many leg spinners who've done well in Australia. Then he was a leg spinner who bowled in Australia who got 300 wickets at 23, which is like unheard of. It's impossible. And then he comes to India and he gets flogged, basically. And he gets flogged because he's injured and he can't bowl his flipper. And so he's basically, really, really, he's bowling at handicap. But nevertheless, he bowled 67 overs per test match in that series. And he never once complained about how tough it was. He kept bowling. It didn't work, but he kept bowling. That's greatness in a bowler. But who remembers that? You'd say, give me the great highlights of Shane Warne's career. No one's going to point to that feat.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Shane Warne, I mean, the late Shane Warne, I must say, I'd interviewed him about the 2001 Calcutta test, the famous test where India followed on and won. And, Shane Warne bowled what? I mean, in the first innings, he bowled like 20 overs for 2 wickets. And in the second innings, he bowled 34 overs for 152 with 1 wicket. And the memory of that test, is like Lakshman, coming down the track, driving Shane Warne inside out. And, there is a certain measure of how Shane Warne got pummeled in that test. But, his memory of that test was, I bowled 50 overs in that test, first of all. That's a lot of overs. Secondly, I probably bowled like 20 to 25 bad balls, which they all hit for 4. I mean, usually batsmen don't put away all the bad balls, but Lakshman and Dravid and all these guys was batting so well that day that they put all the bad balls away for 4. But if you take out those 20, 25 balls, I bowled around 280 other balls, which I thought were very good. And he actually remembers that spell as being a very good spell. And he was only appreciative that these batsmen had done so well, despite the fact that he had bowled well. That is such like a wonderful way to look at your performance, rather than just saying, yeah, Shane, whatever. Like Shane Warne was pathetic on that day.
I mean, it is sort of the view of a very, very great competitor. I mean, in that 98 series, the more I think about it, the more extraordinary it seems. Because look, at that time, Shane Warne was in his mid-20s, just beginning to be in his late 20s, and he had nothing but success wherever he went. He went to South Africa, he got a lot of wickets. He went to England, he got a lot of wickets. He bowled in Australia, he got a lot of wickets. He bowled against, European teams, and he got a lot of wickets. He bowled against Asian teams, he got a lot of wickets. I mean, his record against Pakistan was extraordinary. And then he comes to India, and suddenly he's getting hammered. And this is a guy who's not like a renowned tourist. This is a guy who brings his own spaghetti and intends to eat, because he doesn't like the local food very much. And yet, when it comes to his bowling, I mean, he was extraordinary in that series, I think. But it didn't work for him because firstly, let's be honest. I mean, Robertson and Wilson and Rifle were not exactly very good support. But, it was, I think, an extraordinary performance.
Both Wilson and Rifle are umpires now. Robertson, I think, went into music, right, after this thing. But yeah, very, very, very thin support cast for that series. And of course, Navjot Sidhu. He's up against Navjot Sidhu, who thought spinners shouldn't exist in this universe. Yeah. So
Azharuddin, Sidhu.
Yeah. Tendulkar, of course. Yeah.
Lakshman.
No,
Lakshman opening. Yeah.
Talking of great bowlers for weak teams, and that asymmetry is spot on, right? But given what it is, we got to look at two people, which is Richard Hadlee and Muralidharan. Both are extraordinary exceptions, and they could single-handedly tilt the balance of power when they played for their team, and they had if you want to talk about true match winners, that's probably the zone that we can probably look at, single-handed.
But I don't think either was a bad team, by the way. I think New Zealand in the 80s was a good team. And
it's a good team. No, but what about the bowling support? I'm just saying that if you are the only great bowler in the team, the amount of burden that you got to take, like Kemar Roach or Chaminda Vaz, or Chaminda Vaz, you can't say soul, but at least fast bowler. Javagal Srinath, when they bowled, there was the reason why they could not have a great career is because they bowled for a weak attack. Like a Javagal Srinath playing for today's Indian team or a today's Australian team would have been a superstar bowler, right? But despite the odds being against them, especially for Richard Hadlee to have that kind of a record was phenomenal. And how do you neutralize that? Like, if you want to compare Richard Hadlee to any other great fast bowler, how are you going to neutralize for the fact that he barely had any support as compared to any other great bowler in that sort of league?
Well, I mean, one thing is that with both Muralidharan and Richard Hadlee, they were basically really, really, really superb bowlers, and superb in the sense that they had sort of wicket-taking ability in a wide range of conditions. And added to that, not only were they good at taking wickets in all sorts of conditions, nobody else in their side was particularly that great at taking wickets in all sorts of conditions. So they got a lot of wickets, because there was nobody else to take those wickets as a general rule. So they don't have that much competition for those. That's why their sort of wicket-taking speed is extraordinary. I mean, that's sort of what happens to Ashwin in India a little bit. Ashwin's wicket-taking ability is extraordinary, but he's really only competing with Jadeja for wickets in India. The fast bowlers do take wickets, and that's been the case in the last 4-5 years. But the first, from 2013 to 2018, the fast bowling was not really taking that many wickets. But Ashwin was taking mountains of wickets. So, to some extent, the wicket aggregate and the sort of wickets per match rate is shaped by how much you bowl, what is the range of conditions in which you are effective, and how much competition you have for wickets.
Now, that's partly true, but for let's say that's the difference between a Kemar Roach and a Srinath and and plenty of other bowlers who bowl for weaker teams against as compared to Hadley or Muralidharan, right? It is only a benefit. The fact that you're competing for wickets with fewer good bowlers, which tends to improve your aggregate and so on, is only a benefit if you are in that sort of elite level, right? There may be like 10 other bowlers. If they had the same advantage as Hadley and Muralidharan could have, gotten anywhere close to that.
They have, I mean, as far as ability and range and that goes, I mean, they are unmatched. I mean, there's this. I don't think there's any bowler who's, better than them. That's absolutely true. I mean, Muralidharan is an extraordinary bowler. I mean, there was an interesting question that came up. I just glanced at it today about, what bowling attack would you pick if you wanted to take 20 wickets in this Rawalpindi road? Vaughan and Murali would definitely be in it, if you ask.
Yeah, I mean, Vaughan, Murali, maybe like one of the Pakistani dates, Wasim, maybe Imran, who knew how to bowl.
Oh, I would say Vaughan, Murali, Cummins, Waqar, the sort of the prime Waqar of like 1993, and maybe Wasim of 1990. That would be what I would think.
Yeah,
right? There was that New Zealand test, you remember, where Pakistan scored some 600 runs or whatever.
Yeah.
And he bowls he gets a 5-wicket haul in no time.
Yeah, okay. The reason why I brought up Roach, I remembered now, is when Roach reached 250 wickets. He reached 250 wickets, right, recently. And there was a sort of a stat comparison on the TV when he did that. Basically, he's got 250 wickets in 73 tests at an average of 26.8 and a strike rate of 52, right? 14, 10 5-wicket hauls, 14 times 4 wickets, etc.
It's Gillespie's record, basically.
It's Gillespie's, but then there was also Roach. There was a comparison with Andy Roberts, who has got 202 wickets at 25.6, like pretty close average at a strike rate of 55, which, I mean, Roach is better in that front. And, 11 5-wicket hauls for Roberts, 10 5-wicket hauls for Roach. So, I mean, numerically comparable, but I think the fact that number one, Roberts played in that West Indies team. Number two, there just seems to be this aura where you say that, Roberts, Holding. I mean, Marshall, I can understand. Marshall was a completely different sort of league. But, that sort of the other bowlers seem to be like, you can't touch them. It's like there is no right that you have to compare any of these bowlers to them. But
Gavaskar said that Roberts was the cleverest fast bowler of them all. That's it, finished. I mean,
exactly. But why nobody says Roach is the cleverest fast bowler is because he's playing with like some 6 other all-time greats. No,
because Gavaskar
the international
didn't face
scene.
Roach, no, because Gavaskar didn't face Roach.
No, Gavaskar and Chappell both bat for Roberts, and both say that he had 2 bouncers.
That's all fine. I mean, there's no faith.
But you see, here's what's happening over there. You have to see what's happening over there. It's like Gavaskar and Chappell are sticking up for a player of their generation, right? One of their peers. They're sticking up for like their guys, So that's the whole sort of thing about generations. You will. It is very, very, very rare to find like a player from back in the day saying, "Oh, these guys are better than us." Like for instance, isn't there this whole thing in Australia right now about the current Australian players not getting on with like the Ponting and Hayden and all that?
Langer, basically, yeah.
Yeah, because of the beef with Justin Langer and stuff. And isn't there like some major diplomatic effort going on between the two, like Hindustan, Pakistan, like they're like the Cold War adversaries. It's just like this is a classic thing. No, I mean in the parlance of any era, players from one era stick together. It's why there is no conversation about off spinners in which Ian Chappell will not bring up Ash.
That's a fair point. But the other point I want to bring up is how, the Gavaskar example itself, like the batting point of view, Gavaskar automatically gets credit for being a great batsman. I mean, Gavaskar was a great batsman. There's no doubting that. But the extra points that he gets, the brownie points, is because he played his career at a time when there were no helmets, right? Like Gavaskar was facing all these great West Indian bowlers and Dennis Lillee and everyone else without a helmet. That's fair enough.
But he used a skull cap.
Yeah, he used a skull cap and thankfully didn't get hit. Okay, that's all fair enough. And of course, he had that superior technique where he would not get hit. I completely agree with all that. Then at the same time, why don't you give Roach a little bit of extra credit? Because Roberts bowled at batsmen without helmets. Well, Roach is bowling at a time when batsmen do have all the advantages, right? So why don't you give him that advantage?
But Sid, you don't understand. You see, how did you learn about the greatness of Gavaskar and Roberts? I learned it for the first time I still remember reading this. In Sportstar, I read this Raju Bharathan piece, and it was like, wow, a special Raju Bharathan piece, like all special there. And then he's recounting a conversation, imaginary conversation he's having with Gavaskar, about Indian openers struggling in some overseas tour. I think it was either England in '96 or something in that era. And Raju Bharathan is talking to Gavaskar, and Gavaskar is telling him all this about technique and this and that, and and Raju Bharathan is speaking as like this imaginary lesser Indian opener, and Gavaskar is replying to him. And at one time, like Bharathan replies, he says, "But Sunil, you might be able to cope with the ball, whizzing by inches from your nose. I cannot do that. Like, you cannot compete with that. There is no evidence you can offer which is ever going to overcome like the aura and the image which that produces in your mind. That's just an extraordinary thing. And Bharathan had that ability.
No, but I know that's fine. But then give the same thing to Roberts. No, say that Roberts was one of the advantages that he had was the batters didn't have helmets. So his potency was even more amplified because of that. So that is never given. So like a Lillee or a Roberts never gets that sort of thing, that as the qualification.
But you can't compete with the rampaging Roberts at Chepauk being resisted purely with square cuts by Vishwanath. While Vishwanath made 97. You cannot compete with that. That makes Roberts out to be like this extraordinarily beautiful monster. And mere fast bowlers who called Kemar Roach cannot compete with that.
So on your point of players standing up for the era, that makes perfect sense, right? I mean, Chappell talking about Ashley Mallett or so many other sort of examples like that. But my question is, 20 years down the line, would current Kemar Roach's contemporaries talk of him the same way? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is going to stand up for Kemar Roach 20 years down the line. I'm sorry.
Right now, if Virat Kohli right now tries to stand up for his player, Surya Kumar Yadav. He says, Surya Kumar Yadav plays another, video game innings, the best player in the world, so and so. And there are Kohli fans writing to Kohli saying, "You're the best player in the world. Shut up." It's happening.
Shut up.
So
yeah, this is taking Kohli fandom to a new level.
So 20 years from now, when Kohli says something, some guy on Twitter will say something memorable like that, and we will remember that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think. There is definitely a variance in terms of that eras also. Like, I think one can say that there are certain players and certain countries from which they do that. But yeah, overall, I think a lot of players, they played in a weak team. Oh, Kemar Roach will get grouped among these bowlers who bowled for this West Indian team that was not so great, went and got hammered everywhere. won a few tests at home, but again, hey, that's at home. But that it'll become that kind of a thing. But one point
sorry, Jay, but to be fair, someone like Ian Bishop, for instance, talks of Kemar Roach in that league. And he knows, one, his cricket, his bowling, and more importantly, the history of West Indies bowling. And for him to put Kemar Roach in that league tells us that there are people who recognize that. And I also believe that, some kind of revisionism will happen over time. And we will perhaps give him due credit.
No, but as a cricket matter, it's not even in question. Kemar Roach is in that league. I mean, you take 250 wickets at 26, you're as good as someone else who took 250 wickets at 26. It takes a long time to take 250 wickets. It takes a long time to play 70 tests. It takes a long time and a broad range of conditions and opponents over which you get to collect 250 wickets. Especially if you're playing for West Indies and not for England or Australia. So, yeah, as a cricket matter, it's not even in question. Yeah, Kemar Roach is a great bowler. But we are talking about greatness, and that depends on whether you have like Raju Bharathan to champion.
Yeah, that actually is the point I wanted to bring up. This sort of the economics of greatness as well, right? Like you need a certain system to champion your greatness, like a Kemar Roach or a Kane Williamson, or even Kane Williamson. Okay, he's probably an exception there, but say Ross Taylor or anybody from the small six, so to speak, don't have that ecosystem. Their games are not as widely watched. They don't play anything more than often don't play anything more than a 2-test series, or even 3 tests is a big luxury. A team like Sri Lanka, a team like New Zealand, how often do they play 3-test series even? So there is, like, first of all, Joe Root and Kohli and Smith are playing far more test cricket than many of the other contemporary batsmen. That's number one. They are more visible. Their matches are more covered. They are more sort of celebrated. They're the biggest publications and the websites and Twitter. Everybody, like, they get a lot of play. But many of these other teams don't get as much play, and then sort of that has a huge effect on the conceptions of these things. And also on the record itself. I mean, forget the conceptions, even like record. Like, it's very, I mean, you play a 2-test series and you fail in one. Basically, then you have like 2 innings to sort of redeem yourself. And then, unlike you say, an Ashes series where you play five tests, then immediately you have these opportunities as well. So there's also that, right?
Yeah, I mean that's really, I mean that one, you can clearly see, especially after this whole big 3 takeover of the calendar, that it's quite obvious. And like someone like Virat Kohli, for instance, is a great beneficiary of that, right? In his first series in England, he flopped badly. Then he had this massive 5-test series to kind of make amends. But someone like a Mahela Jayawardene never got that opportunity. He used to go for 1 or 2 tests and play, which is why like a Sangakkara doing well all over the world is exceptional, because he had very limited opportunities. And and also, like, unlike the earlier sort of generation, they didn't have much tour matches and so on. So they directly jumped into Test cricket. And for Sangakkara to have such a good all-round record all around the world is a different ballpark compared to one of the top 3 teams like a Steven Smith or a Virat Kohli having that kind of a record, because they just have plenty more opportunities to make amends and acclimatize to the conditions and get better at those conditions.
Yeah, Sangakkara.
You were thinking of Sangakkara. I was thinking of Chanderpaul. But yeah, go ahead.
No, both of them actually. But Sangakkara especially is a very interesting case. Sangakkara gets sort of a lot of praise for being elegant, and I never understood that. But he was an extraordinary player. I mean, even granted, he played in a very flat era, a very, very, very batting friendly era. But even there, he made like something like 8,000 runs not playing as a wicketkeeper. It's like 65 or something like that. That's extra. That's not many other players did that for that much time. So Sangakkara does, he did some extraordinary things. So, I mean, he is a terrific player. And yeah, they don't get the opportunities, to play a 3, 4, 5 test series. I mean, they don't, for instance, get to play at Melbourne or Sydney where the pitches are different from say Perth or Brisbane or and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, Sri Lanka got to play a one-off test in England in '98, and they won it. Muralidharan took 16 wickets, and Arvinda and Jayasurya made hundreds, and I think someone else also made 100, and so on and so forth. And it was extraordinary, but it didn't lead to them getting 4 or 5 test series, right? And that's just economics.
No, I think it led to them getting 3 test series. That itself was a start.
Yeah.
The final point, of course, added to the economics is also now the 3-format thing. No, earlier you had basically, till the 60s it was just tests, and then after that you had tests and one-dayers. But even tests and one-dayers, you found that one-dayers weren't as they are today. I mean, the one-dayers of the 70s and 80s were closer to test cricket than the one-dayers of today are. And of course, T20 now is a different sport altogether. I mean, T20 keeps changing so rapidly every year that you never know. And this whole thing comes into play. Like, the players are now struggling to adapt to all 3 formats. Almost nobody, apart from, as we discussed, AB de Villiers, and to an extent, I don't even know. I think AB de Villiers is the clear gold standard in that. Has adapted to these formats, and then the whole concept, the whole idea of, okay, what are you comparing? Okay, this guy is a great one-day player, but he's an average T20 player, but he's okay in Test cricket. It becomes so muddled, right?
I think the one day gave you the illusion that it was much closer to Test cricket, and therefore you had to find these. I'm quite sure that like a lot of people thought Sachin was better than Gavaskar, not just because of the test record, but because Gavaskar was not a great one-day batsman. But it is absurd to compare the two, because Sachin played one-day cricket when the format was more evolved, it was more serious, and he had a lot more practice and so on, right? Like it is in a way, I'm really happy that we are like making this completely different. And even one-day cricket, how do you compare? I have no idea. What is the benchmark for greatness in one-day cricket today? What is the number? Like, for instance, for much of one-day cricket, average of 40 was considered great. A strike rate in the 70s and anything above 80 was considered great. But I don't know what those numbers are today, right? So one-day cricket itself has become very, very difficult to compare between different eras. And Test cricket is still okay in that sense. That, like KD mentioned, it's reasonably self-contained. Each era is self-contained, and then we can adjust for it. But one-day cricket, first of all, the rules have changed, the balls have changed, the ground has changed, the ground dimensions have changed, the bat has changed. It's almost a different sport compared to what it was 30 years back. So I think it's a good thing. I think the fact that we keep all these comparisons separate is a great thing.
So one-day cricket, so tell me, if you were to name 3, among the cricketers playing today, if you were to name 3 great one-day batters and 3 great one-day bowlers, can you pick them?
I have no idea.
I would think Kohli is a great one-day batter. Of course. But I can't go beyond that.
I don't know who are the top 3. Kohli is a great batsman, but I don't know if he's... I know he's in the top 3. Kohli is not a good example.
Actually, this is one thing which I have written quite a bit about comparing one-days across eras, because the rules have changed, etc. There's like 3 or 4 pieces somewhere. I'll send them to you. But yeah, Kohli is definitely an all-time great. I think Mitchell Starc is an all-time great one-day bowler. Who else? I think Saeed Ajmal.
Playing today. I want players playing today. I know Starc and Kohli. I can vaguely guess, but who else?
Yeah, Starc, Kohli. I would say Bairstow. Mahesh is whispering Rohit, obviously. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fine. If you want to. But I would put David Warner,
Jason Roy
in there. Not really. He's not really in the best. So he's sort of little bit lesser than Bairstow, no?
And what about bowlers? Bumrah, maybe?
Just Buttler, definitely. I would have Jasprit Bumrah. Then you would have what's his name? Mitchell Starc. You also have, I think, you would also have Cummins and Rabada. Yeah, I mean, they are as good as any of their predecessors. But see, the thing about greatness, if you were to summarize this now, is that there are sort of two ways of getting at greatness. One is the sort of the greatness which comes from being memorialized by Raju Bharathan, which you cannot argue with, which is immutable. And then there's a greatness in the record, and that you can argue about and dispute and measure, and that I think that second greatness is much more fun and much more so sustainable.
No, but also I think the other problem is that generally in cricket, I mean, historically, there have probably been a few sort of publications and things that discuss this on a regular basis. Like I think Wisden used to do Wisden did the Wisden 100 once and all that. And, the newspapers often, like every year, they would put out things like these things. But these days, the sort of, and I'm talking about like, talking not the nostalgic sort of discussions. I'm talking about the actual record-based discussions. But these days, that also seems to have died down. And like, who do you like? What is that? That yearly annual article or annual thing that you look forward to discuss these things? There isn't that sort of benchmark, anymore. So I mean, you can come up with it by yourself, but it would be nice if there was somebody taking this seriously and doing this on a regular basis, so that you can say, okay, last year this was our top 3 or this was our top 5, and then this year we have changed it to this, etc., etc. So there isn't that. I mean, in baseball and other American sports, they still have that. I mean, there are places where people will go and they will. There are places that regularly publish these things every year. At the end of every season, there are awards given and all, and there is like a massive discussion around all this. So cricket doesn't seem to have that anywhere.
True. I mean, it did. No, I mean, Wisden, the annual almanac was that thing. But since the internet came about, Cricinfo doesn't really do it. I mean, they're the one publication which could do it if they decided to, but they don't. They have the awards thing, and I don't know if that serve the same purpose.
They don't do it in the sort of the rigorous way in which they can, and they have done some stuff like that in the past, but it doesn't seem to be like a regular occurrence, is what I'm saying. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, maybe 81 All Out, we should do like some we should go the other way. Should say the most spectacular collapses of the last 20 years, the most disastrous performances of the last 20 years. We set the benchmark from the bottom.
The greatest heartbreaks.
Anyway, yeah. So I think this was a good discussion. We covered quite a bit. A regular reminder: 81 All Out's project into republishing cricket classics. Please pick up War Minus the Shooting by Mike Marquesi, Cricket Beyond the Bazaar by Mike Coward, 2 books that we republished, and 2 wonderful reads. Hopefully, we will come up with something else pretty soon. Also, 81allout.com is our website, at 81allout on Twitter. Would love to hear from you, feedback on our website or tweet to us. Anything will be valuable. Please rate and review our podcast. That is also good. And I recently found out that if you listen to us on Spotify, you can actually even leave a comment in that podcast space. I saw a couple of people commenting in the previous podcast. So that was great. Thank you also for all the wonderful words for our previous podcast, which was with the founder of Cricinfo, Simon King, and an early pioneer. That seems to have, really got some attention and taught quite a few people about the origins of, both the internet as well as cricket scoring and archiving. So yeah, thank you for that. And we'll hopefully see you for our next episode in the next week or 10 days. Thanks.
India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for 2. India home. Lords goes wide.